Today is March 10th, 2020, and I come to you with a quick update. There's been a lot of developments over the past 24 hours in regards to the coronavirus, not only here in New York City, but around the world and around the country. So let's get into the new news bits and what's behind all this. Let's dig deep. Let's whatever metaphor you want to use. Let's go. First up, let's look at the New York Times tracking every coronavirus case in the U.S. Full map updated March 10th, 6:49 p.m. Eastern Time, about 3 hours ago. Now we see that New York is now the second most infected state after Washington. It's been exploding here, and mostly it's been concentrated in Westchester. So many people come in and out of New York City, but you see here it's all over the country now, with Washington, California, and New York as the hardest hit states. Boston is coming up a little bit after that. The thing is, we are really late on reacting to this. In New York, we've got some containment going on. New York creates coronavirus containment zone. New deaths reported in South Dakota and Washington State. So we're going to get to that in just a second. But overall, as of Tuesday evening, at least 973 people in 37 states and Washington, D.C. have tested positive for coronavirus, according to a New York Times database. And at least 30 patients with the virus have died in the United States.
New Rochelle is a particular problem. It is what they call a cluster. The numbers have been going up. The numbers continue to go up. The numbers are going up unabated. And we do need a special public health strategy for New Rochelle. What we are going to do is focus on an area, concentric circle, around the situs of the majority of the cases in New Rochelle. Much of the transmission tends to happen on a geographic basis. Kids go to school, kids go to a store, parents go to a store, parents walk down the block, shake hands with someone, parent is walking the dog, meets somebody, says hello, has a conversation. Remember how this spreads. It can spread from it's a respiratory illness, droplets of a sneeze, a cough, it's on somebody's hand, you shake hands, now you have an issue. So containment strategies focus on geographic areas.
Just a few points about that containment zone. Governor Andrew Cuomo says it would only apply to large facilities throughout the zone. Think of places where there would be mass gatherings. It wouldn't apply to people's houses or small businesses, not places like that. People would be allowed to come and go throughout the containment zone as they see fit. Cuomo said the idea was developed by Health Commissioner Howard Zucker.
We know where the center of the activity has occurred from the information, the public health, and the epidemiology investigation from the beginning of the Westchester and New Rochelle outbreak, and we felt that a radius of a mile from that spot would be effective in an effort to try to decrease the spread. I spoke to some of the public health experts the other day and also this morning, all the time I should say, about this issue. And we have to remember that we are sitting with the first point on a curve, or first couple points on a curve. And it would be wonderful to be able to go in the future and look back and see how this curve is going to evolve. But we don't know that. And so the most important thing to do is to take all the precautions we can and balance that from a level of protection with that of what could be somewhat disruptive, and we understand some things will be disruptive. So we're moving forward with that and happy afterwards to discuss it further.
So in New Rochelle, there's going to be some containment. In the article, they mentioned that they're not going to be quarantining people, but they're going to be containing certain facilities, mostly schools, and I believe they're going to cancel the marathon coming up in New York City. So finally, there's some movements being made in New York City to address this issue. In my opinion, it's probably too little, too late. They're going to do this containment just in these facilities for 2 weeks. Meanwhile, people are still going to be going back and forth. It's still going to be spreading. It's starting to look like the only way to slow this down is to establish quarantines. In Italy, the quarantine that they have going on that affects the whole country under quarantine, they're seeing that new infections are going down. So there's some hope there with quarantine. The only thing is that with quarantine comes some other issues in the United States, and especially in New York City. You've got a lot of poor and desperate people that, you know, whether they're homeless or living in poverty and just living paycheck to paycheck, they don't have supplies, they don't have food stored up. They're living day by day, check by check, and they are one of the most at risk, along with the elderly and those with underlying health conditions such as diabetes and lung disease. Basically, the effects on the infrastructure are what I'm most worried about, and of course, humanity under pressure and in desperation. That's what I'm more worried about than the actual virus itself. I've got the nutraceuticals and vitamins to fight diseases, and my immune system, I think, is pretty okay, even though I smoke a little bit here and there. I take care of myself, I exercise, and I'm going to stop smoking for a little bit, just so that I have some added protection. I do use a couple different lung sprays. One is olive oil base, which is supposed to be able to fight bacteria. And there's a lot of natural things that fight bacteria that you can check out and try out, because pharmaceuticals are all made in China. Some of the critical medications that are basically only made in China. Here's a list of critical medicines, and this isn't specifically just those that are mostly made in China, but just in general, most of them, a lot of stuff that we purchase is made in China, and with factories closed over there, we can expect some supply shortages. There's been a lot of talk about that a lot of distributors are foreseeing supply shortages. So we're just going to take a quick look through here. So, EpiPens, people with severe allergies, they won't be able to get those. Drugs for active bleeding. In the United States, one of the biggest epidemics is obesity, and they say obesity is about as harmful to the body as smoking. You have a lot of sedentary people outside of big cities. Most people drive places. They go to the drive-through. They sit on their ass all day. They come home, they watch TV or whatever, and they sit on their ass all day. And there's going to be a lot of things. Insulin, I think I mentioned. The emergency fluid, like when you're in the hospital, you got the bag of IV fluid there. Yeah, IV fluid. I'm not a doctor. I'm not even really that great with science, so I can't tell you all of the medicines, but this is a lot of them. There's so many different chronic diseases that people are suffering from, and they might not have access to it if supply lines are cut from China. So I think it's pretty safe to say that we're going to see a lot of quarantines happening in the United States, at least in the big cities. In New York City, it makes sense to quarantine everybody. That's what's proven to be working. I'm just concerned that it's going to get a little bit hairy here in New York City. with so many people hanging on by a thread barely. Um, I've got some supplies, I've got some food, but I don't know how long I could last with that. Maybe a month or two, or I don't know. It's hard to tell, and it's hard to tell, what it's going to be like outside. I was just talking to my girlfriend earlier, and I was like, babe, you should really stock up. What are you gonna do if you're stuck inside? Like, how are you gonna get food? And she was like, well, my boyfriend will come save me. But hey, if there's like a curfew, if everybody's quarantined, not allowed to leave their house, what do you think's gonna be going on outside? You're gonna have criminals running around. You're gonna have homeless running around. They got nowhere else to go. They're gonna be looking for food if they don't have food. They're gonna be looking for water if they don't have water. Not only that, but you're going to have police in hazmat suits patrolling outside, making sure that nobody walks around. If the government says they want you to stay inside, they're going to enforce that to the fullest extent of the law. And we've seen in China what happened under a medical tyranny, which is what formed there. It was a tyranny before the coronavirus, but it became a medical tyranny after it. And speaking of China, this next bit of news, and this ties to China because the rumors have it that China's been cremating a bunch of bodies in the Hubei province. But this definitely causes some concern here. New York City's emergency surge plan for a severe pandemic calls for Rikers Island inmates to dig mass graves to bury up to 51,000 bodies. So, of course, cities have to have contingency plans for even the worst cases. But this just gives you an idea that, hey, these things happen and that we should be prepared for it. Obviously, we're not prepared enough, but just look back at the Spanish flu. That's a big thing that's showing up on the YouTube recommendations. Let me tell you, everybody's looking at these documentaries right now that show how we were not prepared for that back then. Millions of people died, and it was a different world. People were like shitting in the streets and stuff, but we're closer to that than we were 10 or 20 years ago because of, the recession and stagnant wages and, the homeless epidemic, the opiate epidemic. The country isn't in great shape, despite what people may say. And even our economy is very fragile, not as strong as it's being promoted. But the government kind of has to say the economy is doing well to, influence you, to make you have confidence in the economy. That's why they say, hey, it's all good. But, there's a huge real estate bubble. There's huge bubbles that have formed since the recession. A lot of people are saying that it's just been expanding. The bubble has not completely popped because of the stimulus from the recession, and these companies and banks that have gotten stimulus have just continued the same practices. So, a lot of economists are saying that the bubble is set to pop. But this isn't that far-fetched to have a situation where you have thousands of people dead. What can you do with them? You're gonna have to burn them, or if there's just so many bodies, you gotta get them out of the way, or they'll infect or make people sick. Mass graves might be one of those things that they lean on, and who better than inmates, right? The new slave class, inmates that work for cents by the hour, for big companies like TWA, doing their customer service, and they're not just printing license plates in jail. They're doing all kinds of jobs that we could be doing at the fraction of the price. The CDC recently, earlier today, put out a notice for people at risk for serious illness from COVID-19. They define people at a higher risk as older adults and people who have serious chronic medical conditions like heart disease, diabetes, and lung disease, which a lot of people do have in the United States. As I mentioned, obesity is through the roof. We've got a lot of hard drug use. We got a lot of smokers, and people that smoke are more at risk. So now's a good time to take a break or to quit. If you're smoking cigarettes, and I mean, even if you're smoking weed, like some of us, it might be a time to take a break until this stuff clears up. So they're saying you should stock up on supplies. Take everyday precautions to keep space between yourself and others. Something that's impossible in New York City if you're going to taking a train, going anywhere. My Mondays are particularly stressful because I work in Manhattan on Mondays, and I got to go during the morning to get out there. I got to go during that morning rush, and it's packed in there. It's packed, and there's always at least a couple people coughing. I could be sitting here with corona right now, and I have no idea, because you can have it and it can be infectious. You can still spread it and not have any symptoms. So how do you know unless you get tested? And only now we've gotten tests. I believe it's 6 private labs in New York City that now have the tests, and now across the country, millions of tests have been sent out, as Pence had said in a briefing earlier today or yesterday. So finally, millions of tests have come out, been given out, and we're really late on this. We're really late on this response. So when you go out in public, keep away from others who are sick. Limit close contact and wash your hands often. Avoid crowds as much as possible. Avoid cruise travel and non-essential air travel. During an outbreak in your community, stay home as much as possible to further reduce your risk of being exposed. So some are looking at this as a hint that there will be some quarantining going on. So my advice would be, like the CDC says, if you can stay inside, stay inside. If you're retired, like my mother is, just stay inside. Don't go anywhere. I unfortunately am not working full time. I'm not sitting on any sick days or PTO that I could take, because if I had it, I would take it. And I would not be going out on crowded trains. I've noticed that the gym, there's less people going to the gym, but I haven't been going at busy times intentionally. But it seems like less people are going to the gym now, and I'm starting to think maybe I should not go to the gym anymore. I went to the gym earlier, I'm just trying to be very careful about washing my hands after I touch anything. The best thing you could do is just, quarantine yourself now, or get as close to a quarantine now as you can, while still taking care of your daily tasks and the things you have to take care of. You want to stay positive during this. You want to stay optimistic, because if you get too nerve-wracked, if you get too anxious, that will actually lower your immune system. So you want to remain calm. You want to, have a positive outlook on this. But the reality is that we may get a quarantine very soon. This thing is exploding very fast. I wouldn't be surprised if they started quarantining parts of New York a week from now. And this is why I was thinking about bugging out to North Carolina. My cousin's in a small town out there. That would be a great place to bug out to. If supply lines were to get cut, there's land where you can grow, vegetables and, have farm animals and things like that. There's a little more potential for self-sufficiency in rural areas. In urban areas, it's like a trap. It's like a mouse trap where we're pushed up against each other, and millions of people. It's hard not to be right next to somebody in New York City. When you get on a crowded train, you're right next to somebody. They're breathing everywhere around you, and some of them, you still catch people coughing in the open air, like there's not this shit on the news every day. So we've got this video. It's a clip from the Joe Rogan Experience. He had on today infectious disease expert Michael Osterholm, and he talks about the potential severity of the coronavirus. So let's take a look at that.
Probably the best guesstimate we have right now on what limited data we have is say this is going to be at least 10 to 15 times worse than the worst seasonal flu year we see.
10 to 15 times worse in terms of fatalities?
Yeah, and just illness. In fact, I brought some numbers. We conservatively estimate that this could require 48 million hospitalizations, 96 million cases actually occurring, over 480,000 deaths that can occur over the next 3 to 7 months with this situation. So this is not one that to take lightly. And I think that's what I can understand if you say there's only been 10 deaths or 20 deaths or 50 deaths. Just remember, 2 weeks ago, we were talking about almost no cases in the United States. And now that we're testing for it and watching the spread as it's unfolding, those numbers are going up astronomically. 3 weeks ago, Italy was just living life just fine. Now they're literally in a virtual shutdown in the northern parts of Italy.
Thanks for checking out this video. I'm going to cut it here because I've got to get some rest. I've got work tomorrow. I got to keep trying to make that money, especially with a potential quarantine looming. There's no telling how long I might get cut off from income. So luckily, I've got my supplies. I encourage you to get yours. I'm still going to make a video about, what are some of the things you should be getting stocked up on. What are the kind of supplies you should have. You should definitely have some food and water, that's for sure. Food and water. The immediate short term, as we're still in public, you want to have that hand sanitizer, which is now so hard to find and so expensive. But if you can find some, find some. And just wash your hands whenever you can. Really be OCD about just washing your hands whenever you can. And maybe there's some alternatives to hand sanitizer, like regular hand sanitizer that, maybe there's some alternatives, carry a lemon and cut it in half and rub your hands in the juices. That'll kill some bacteria too. Like, I don't know. We're going to have to start thinking outside the box if we are going to not get any supplies from China anymore. And this brings me to this point, this closing point. This lesson that we need to learn from this is that we can't rely on globalism. Globalism does not work. When you have one country fulfilling all the supplies of a certain thing, and then you have this pandemic type of situation, and they get shut down, then that keeps medicine and supplies and food off of everybody else's basket. We don't get that stuff. We can't get it because the factories get shut down. So every country needs to be responsible and needs to manufacture their own essential things. Chairs, okay, like we don't need to make our own chairs necessarily. I know that's a stupid example, but every country should be making their own medicine. They should be making their own hand sanitizer. These are important things. With everything that's been going on in China, under communist rule, ever since they got into power, they've killed millions and millions of people. Over 100 million people, with some estimates, 60 million conservatively. The Communist Chinese Party is fucking ruthless. And we can't really trust them. So why do we depend so much on that for our global economy, for our global infrastructure? We're depending on them producing all these goods for us, when in actuality, our country, United States, we're at war with them, at least economically, but definitely there's proxy wars and things like that. We're definitely not allies. We're not friends. So now's the time for the United States to cut the cord, to stop providing so much aid to other countries, to stop relying on so much other countries. We should have alliances, we should have trade deals, things like that. But we shouldn't put so much dependence on people, on other countries, to the point where if we have, for example, this pandemic, we can't get the things we need. That's ridiculous, okay? We need to be more self-sufficient. And us Americans as individuals, all humans should be self-sufficient and should strive for that.